This is a cricket podcast.
Today is our special episode about the wonderful wahine of the cricketing world.
Two mates obsessed with the game.
I'm so glad you mentioned Laura Volgar because I think she's so cool. I spent most of the World Cup just fangirling over her.
Covering all the on-field action.
It's great to see the success there, but actually, how do we translate that into the domestic competition?
This is the Back of a Length podcast.
Kia ora koutou katoa.
That was beautiful, Mark.
Thank you.
Hello. Wow, I was going to say hello, but you beat me to it.
I was only doing that as a joke. I thought you were going to cut me off. But
Absolutely not. This is the Back of a Length podcast based here in the beautiful New Zealand, or Aotearoa. Aotearoa.
I'll do the te reo. I'm a natural.
Lots of cricket on this week.
There has been a lot of cricket on. How are you, anyway? That's how we always start. We ask how each other are.
I'm great because
we're mates, as you can tell by the intro.
I'm great because there's been a lot of cricket on.
Fantastic. I am tired because there's been a lot of cricket on. I was up watching the best test team in the world last night beat Pakistan. Nail biter.
Who would that be? I'm not sure who the...
Are they...
Because I think New Zealand's not playing and they hold the World Test Champion trophy at the moment.
Yeah, they do, but it's the team that is, they probably know. They won't win it this test cycle, but the next test cycle with Bazball will be
yes.
T20 World Cup champions, 50 over World Cup champions and World Test champions as well, and hopefully will be the Women's Cricket World Cup champions as well, and we'll just hold all 4 trophies.
Well, as much as I would hate to see that, you did make a good point there. I'm going to cut you off with this man speak.
Standard.
And we're going to focus on the woman, because today is our special episode about the wonderful wahine of the cricketing world.
Wahine, for those who don't know, is women in te reo. We've got a special guest joining us today. We've got Ellie on from the Women's Cricket Ramblings podcast.
Yes, all the way from Leeds. Welcome to Back of the Length, Ellie.
Hello, thank you. Welcome. Oh, why am I saying welcome to you? This is your podcast.
No, I love that. Welcome to the collaboration. So you run a women's cricket podcast and cricket sort of website. Tell us about that. How did you get into it?
Yeah, it was just sort of something I decided one day I was going to do. I just love talking women's cricket, and not to sound big-headed or anything, but I feel like sometimes I've got things worth listening to. So I was like, why not let people hear these things?
That's like us.
Yeah, I reckon.
So, what is kind of driving content at the moment? What do you think is going huge in women's cricket at the moment?
There's quite a lot of women's IPL talk, isn't there? Just given recent negotiations. There's quite a lot of talk about the English domestic fixtures, how the Rachel Hale-Flint trophies increased from 7 games to 14, so there's one at home, one away for every team, versus every team. And I guess there's some chat about New Zealand. There's never really any big chat about the season, which is a bit disappointing, but there's usually a little bit of chat, which is good.
Yeah, I
do have a question about that, actually, because you're from Yorkshire, so what is it about New Zealand cricket that is the overriding sort of focal point for you?
I mean, I just sort of recognised a market. There's not a lot of coverage, even in New Zealand, on the women's cricket, and over here it's non-existent. And so I thought, you know what, I like women's cricket. I like the cricket I'm watching, because I'm able to watch it, even though it is so late at night. I'm able to see it, and if I'm able to bring it to new people, introduce it to new audiences, even in New Zealand or in England, then that makes me feel good inside, and I think that is the sort of driving force behind it all, really, to get it some coverage.
Yeah, I really like that, because women's cricket has not been big in New Zealand. I think you've kind of known about a few cool people for a long time, like Sophie Devine and Susie Bates and those big names, but the last few years I think New Zealand's really pushed women's cricket, because I remember there was a tournament here in 2019 or 2020 and literally no one turned up.
Yeah, I think the biggest memory that I've got or when I first really sat up and took notice of women's cricket really being pushed to the forefront of the commercial market as much as the spectator market as well, was having the Super Smash games on. And also they had the White Ferns and Black Caps. They'd have T20s and they'd have the Black Caps games on first, or the men's games on first, and then they'd put the women's games on. And I guess the theory behind that was people would go to the men's games and then they'd stay for the women's games. and then actually understand, do you know what, women's cricket's actually awesome. Like, we've done that a couple of times. We go to a men's game and then we'd stay and watch the women's game, and it was fantastic. We sometimes go to watch a women's game first and, you know, then go to the men's game afterwards. Like, doesn't really make a difference to us, but for the average, I guess, sort of semi-cricket fan, I think that was a really good thing that New Zealand cricket actually did, was to put women's games on at the sort of prime time of like 7 o'clock New Zealand time, for example, in the evening. Like, that's prime time TV on a Friday night, for example. I thought they did that really well.
And I think it was quite cool because it all sort of led up to the World Cup this year that we covered quite extensively last season. And I'm going to say I'm a sucker for a World Cup. Like,
I love a World Cup.
I am
mainly,
such a bandwagoner.
Yeah, I do like a World Cup, mainly because we'd won the previous one. So I was so confident that we were going to win this one as well. But yeah, Australia, just a little bit too good. But it was disappointing for New Zealand, I guess, in that respect, that they just couldn't quite get to the latter stages of that tournament, because the crowds were so good all the way through, especially for the main teams like England, Australia, India, naturally. New Zealand, obviously, being the home team. The support was really good for that. So, how many tournaments? Speaking of, obviously, of big tournaments and stuff, for the men's, they have a T20 World Cup, it seems like every 6 weeks at the moment. It is ridiculous. Women's, not so much. Do you think that there maybe needs to be a lot more? I think the biggest irksome thing for me, and you may want to talk to this a lot more than me, but the amount of test matches that they play is insanely low.
Yeah, you probably get more tests in a men's test series. Like, I don't know how many are in this England-Pakistan at the moment, probably 5. Like, that's just the typical. But we're lucky to get even 5 test matches in 3 years in women's cricket. It's ridiculous. And so that's, I think, why we need maybe more tournaments. If boards, because it is the boards who decide whether we get tests or not, if they decide, look, we're not going to give you any tests, then the ICC really need to do something. Well, maybe we'll give them more tournaments to play in, international tournaments. Because I don't feel like we've seen too many World Cup, T20 World Cups anyway, quite recently. I don't know when the last one was in women's cricket. I know the next one's in February, which is good, just after the Under-19s World Cup, Women's World Cup. But I don't know when the next previous one was. It feels quite a long time ago.
They're usually on a 4-year cycle, I think. But yeah, just to your test point.
Ridiculous.
Also, the White Ferns have not played a test since 2004.
Which is ridiculous. I just can't comprehend it. I mean, you've got Australia just over the ditch there. That's not a difficult series to arrange, because Australia's women don't play that many tests either. So, you know, if you want to start building that, it doesn't even have to be anywhere amazing. Like, if you played in Australia, you could play at one of the smaller outer grounds. You wouldn't have to try and sell out the MCG or whatever. Just give them test matches, because it's got to start somewhere, right? There has to be a movement. And maybe today is the day. Maybe today is the movement for women's test cricket to come back.
Let's get a White Ferns test.
Yes.
We're calling it. So New Zealand women have got their summit at the moment. They're currently playing Bangladesh. A bit of a rough start for the Bangladesh last week, being bowled out for 32.
Yeah, it wasn't as rough as the excuse they came up with. Good God.
It was a little bit cold in Christchurch last week.
But yeah, not the greatest start for Bangladesh. It surprises me because Bangladesh are actually a half decent team. They're not obviously up there with the power of Australia, England, White Ferns, and I guess India to a degree. But Bangladesh are not the worst team either, are they?
No, we saw them really, I guess, compete in that World Cup in February in New Zealand, and they didn't do too bad there. And they've been quite a solid T20 nation actually as well. So they're a developing nation, I suppose. They've got some really good players in there, but it is sort of just it all coming together, and I guess it didn't in Christchurch.
Yeah, at least they can only go up from that game.
Well, they did. They only lost their second game by 37 runs, I think. They actually had a good fight back. Well, they had a great young player debuting who got out, Sophie Devine, which is not a bad first international wicket when you're 17 years old and you get out Sophie Devine.
Definitely not. And the Women's Big Bash has just finished as well. So that's obviously the end of another women's tournament, which is a franchise tournament. Adelaide Strikers won that, beating Sophie Eccleston's Sydney Sixers there in the final. People will know that I'm a massive fan of Sophie Eccleston, because she's an Everton fan mainly, but she's also the best bowler in the world. Something about England having the best cricketers in the world, honestly, it's amazing what they're able to produce.
I am here with 2 people from England, so you know.
Oh yeah,
this
definitely.
is like-
Yeah, this is a rarity for me. I'm making the most of this. Although normally this is just me getting defensive and digging in a little bit.
No, but you are right. So the Women's Big Bash, it did finish. Now, this is something I want to throw out as a conversation.
Yes.
So at the moment, T20 franchise leagues are taking over the cricket world. So you have a women's IPL launching next year in India, and that will play before the men's IPL. We've obviously had the Women's Big Bash, and these 2 tournaments play prior to the men's, but as we just said, the Super Smash will play concurrently, and so does the 100.
That's a big word for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Concurrently, I'm proud of you. Anyway, sorry.
So do you think it is better for women's cricket to be playing their own standalone tournament or to be playing alongside the men?
Yeah, it's a tricky one because you've got to do it on, I guess, a case-by-case situation. I think what works in one might not work for the other. In the Super Smash, I think it has worked. I couldn't really say because I'm not physically there to like count everybody in the crowd, but generally the crowds look decent. I've had players say, you know, they're thinking that more people are coming in, that there was a line for the first time in a game that they'd never seen before in the Super Smash. So that is obviously working there. In the 100, like you mentioned, that also runs alongside the men. It's working even better, I would say, because I've been there and I can tell, like, yeah, there's massive sizes. You know, when you look at the 100 crowds, we're breaking records almost every game. Headingley looked so packed when I went, and I've been quite a few times. But when you go to the domestic competitions, you know, the Rachel Hayhoe Flints, the Charlotte Edwards Cups, they're closing off the Western Terrace because they don't need to put security there because they know them seats are going to be empty. So they just shove you onto one side of the ground because that's how few people they expect for them games. So while it is like great to see the success of how, I can't say that word, but how they run alongside each other, that's what, it's great to see the success there, but actually, you know, how do we translate that into the domestic competitions? You know, are we seeing as many people from the Super Smash, for example, come to the HBJ? Are we seeing as many people from the 100 coming to the Charlotte Edwards Cups and the Rachel Hayhoe Flints? And you could argue no. And I've been to the Rachel Hayhoe Flints. There's been about 300, but you go to the 100 and there's like 5,000. It's insane. I mean, that's just for the women's game alone. So I think it has its benefits, but then you've also got to work out how you can translate that into the actual domestic game too.
I think just on the New Zealand season, really the Super Smash is the only one that does attract fans domestically. I know that I think in my whole life I've been to 3 men's one-day international, so it is really hard to get people in New Zealand down to domestic competitions if it's not the Super Smash.
Yeah, I think you also made a good point at the start of that bit though, Ellie, in terms of saying it's got to work for the tournament. New Zealand, you're able to have both games on the same day because there's only 5 sort of domestic teams. You've got Otago, Canterbury, Northern, Auckland.
Come on, Mark, you're a resident now.
I know. And Central Districts. And Otago. I might have said them before. 6. There's 6 teams.
Well,
so
You forgot Auckland.
I said Auckland.
did you
After Northern. Jesus. Number 1. So you're able to have, 2 games on the same day. Whereas you look at the IPL, they have 2 games a day in the men's tournament because they've just got such a massive structure and they play about 700 games that you can't have the women's games and the men's games on the same day because that's just too much in one day. So I think you make a great point in that it has to work for the tournament. The 100 works because, again, there's only, 8 teams, I think, in the 100. So you can have 1 women's game, 1 men's game per day. But for the Big Bash and for the IPL, there's too much cricket going on that you can't do that. Which is your favourite tournament to follow domestically? If you could have 3 months off work, all expenses paid, right? So that means you could even travel, for example. What tournament would you go and sit and watch? And this is banking on every day being sunny, so you can choose 100 if you want, because obviously not every day is sunny there. But if you had 3 months of just watching back to back cricket, what tournament would you go for?
Oh, that's so tricky because I can't say anything other than like the Charlotte Edwards Cup or the Rachel Hayhoe Flint because that makes me look like a really bad English woman. But at the same time, like, I would absolutely go drop everything for the Super Smash.
Would you?
I love the Super
Excellent.
Smash. We love the Super Smash so much. It is back in 2 weeks and we're so excited. I know I've been to a lot of cricket games and it's definitely the most sort of, like, you're so close to the cricketers. The fans are out. It's so much fun.
Yeah, mostly that's a good thing until some of Renee's favourite cricketers come and field on the boundary rope next to Renee, and then it just becomes a little bit awkward and embarrassing.
It was one time.
Oh, hello, Logan, was one particular shout that came out. And it's so quiet because there's only like 1,000 people there that Logan Bake turned around and was like,
Yes,
hello?
you do need to remember that you are quite close to the players. You can refer to last season's episode of I'm sorry for that story and the 2 other stories that followed it later that week.
There's quite a few things, but also, I mean, that's great because you get that interaction with players, whereas you wouldn't necessarily get that at, say, a 90,000 seater MCG and the boundary ropes are in by 20 yards. So I think that's why I love New Zealand cricket, is just having that sort of familial day, being close and just kind of being involved.
Yeah, it's quite vibey. That's how I like to describe it.
Yeah, no, it's a great
it
word
is.
because you probably get that in the Rachel Hayhoe Flint Trophy as well, don't you? Is you get the smaller grounds, like Lancashire play their games at like Cumbria or possibly Southport.
They play a fair few at Old Trafford.
Do they?
Really? That's a big ground.
Yeah.
That is a big ground.
They don't fill it up, sadly, but yeah, they do a few at Old Trafford. And Blackpool, I think, is another one.
Yeah.
Even just the size of Old Trafford, it's such a big ground. Because women's cricket, they do still bring the boundary line in. I think it's by, what was a good few metres.
Yeah, it depends on the ground, I guess, and the ground
okay.
dimensions.
That makes sense.
Yeah, because MCG, they probably bring it a lot further than Eden Park.
Yeah, I know
for
that
example.
they brought it in at I think Hagley Oval last week when the White Ferns were playing Bangladesh. But then I think, like, some people laugh at that, but I actually think it makes the game better. It makes it way more exciting because it's easier to get boundaries.
See, I'm on the fence about it because I do think that women's cricket is a different skill set, a different game. So, you know, people, I guess you want to try and bring your audience in, right? People come and watch T20 cricket to see big sixes and to see fours and stuff, but also I've got a massive appreciation for the skill level to be able to find gaps. And I guess in women's cricket, if you don't bring the boundaries in, it's finding those gaps and scoring 2s and 3s, and then your fitness comes into it. So it does become a different skill set, a different game, and I do enjoy those games. Like Eden Park, when we went to the World Cup, for example, India, New Zealand, wasn't any massive boundaries. Like, there was no real 6s, you know, there's a few 4s and stuff, which was great, but it was more about trying to build a total of 250, 300 just through finding the gaps, you know, getting the ball through the gaps, running hard, you know, putting the fielders under pressure. That in itself becomes an exciting game then.
I don't know, because, I mean, I'm going to refer back to the 100 because that's sort of where I've seen most of it, but they clear the ropes really easily, you know. Deandra Dottin's whacking it, and it's still going for 6 regardless of whether the boundary's, like, 2 feet away or however far away it is.
Yeah.
But, like, it's a tricky one, and I feel like it gives away too many falls sometimes. Maybe I'm a bit anti-boundary, I don't know. But I think they can clear them with ease, so it just seems a bit silly to bring them in. At Headingley, that's notorious for being a bit silly. Like, that one's in really close. So, yeah, it depends on the ground, to be honest, I think. At Headingley, yeah, it's ridiculous. Like, they do need to, like, bring it out, let them hit 4s and 6s that they need, because they can do it anyway, regardless of whether it's close to them or not. Like, I just think they need to set it to a decent size. But then you look at places elsewhere and it actually looks a decent size once. And that's what I guess what we were doing during the 100. There was just people on boundary watch seeing how far and close it was. And you could argue that, you know, in those games people would or would not be able to clear the ropes easily. I think it is just sort of a ground by ground situation. But I'm not a massive fan of the closed in boundaries generally.
Fair.
Interesting, yeah, definitely fair. I think you also raised a good point, which is something we sort of, you know, it's a very big conversation, but should you be comparing men's cricket and women's cricket? Obviously, there was a huge argument that came out earlier this year when New Zealand Cricket announced they would pay men and women the same match fees, and I don't think I've ever seen Twitter explode as much as it did that day, and I was here for it. And India have now said they will do the same. But should you be really comparing the men's game and the women's game?
I guess it depends in context. I don't think paying the same is necessarily comparing them. I think, they show up on the day, they do the same job, and that's sort of as much as you can compare with them. I don't really like the player comparisons, you know what I mean? I think I often see that the Laura Wolfart is the Virat Kohli of women's cricket, but it's like, she's Laura Wolfart, she's not Virat Kohli, she is her own player. She may have certain shots that look like Virat Kohli, but she's not the Virat Kohli of women's cricket. She's her own achievements, she's her own person. So it does feel like, in that context, when you're sort of overriding a women's player in place of a men's, if that makes sense, that's sort of where I get a bit iffy about it. But with things like fair pay, I don't necessarily think it's comparing. I think it's just rewarding everybody, regardless of who they are, for showing up and playing. That's sort of how I see it.
I'm so glad you mentioned Laura Wolfart, because I think she's so cool.
Yeah.
I spent like most of the World Cup just fangirling over her.
Same, apart from when she played England.
Yes.
Naturally. Yeah, no, it's a very good point though. Like, obviously the pay stuff, I guess, is completely separate to comparing men and women. You can't compare them by their wage, because they, as you say, they turn up, they effectively do the same job. So that's a different conversation piece. But, turning up and saying, well, everybody's coming here because they want to see fours and sixes, so we've got to bring the banjo ropes in because that's what people come to see men's cricket, is not necessarily the right argument. It's, well, actually, you've come to appreciate a different skill set. Or, yeah, as you say, oh, yeah, Smriti Mandhana is the female Virat Kohli. No, she's not. She is her own player. And I think you make a great point on that as well, as let's start appreciating who they are, not something else, not something else entirely. So I think that's definitely a mindset change that still needs to be talked about and still needs to be pushed, is let's appreciate who they are and what they do for what they are, also for who they are and what they do, as opposed to let's appreciate who they are, comparing them to somebody else.
So as we mentioned earlier, we're going into another World Cup next year. It's about, 3 months away?
Yep.
Tell us your favourite thing about a World Cup.
England lifting a trophy.
Oh, shush, not you. I was not talking to you.
Oh, sorry.
I was talking to our guest.
Right, okay, my bad. Sorry.
I mean, it's with all sports, really. It's just fun to get behind your country. I think it's a bit different than supporting your county or your city. That's quite personal to you. But for your country, there's a greater pride, I feel. But yeah, I guess World Cups are just different, aren't they? It's not like internationals. It's all these countries. It's all the best players effectively from these countries. Though if that was true, Kate Ibrahim will be playing for the Whiteburns. But yeah, it's just all the best players coming together and playing, really.
I just think you just learn so many new players. Like at the end of the last World Cup, I felt like I could talk about people like Laura Wolfart and Sophie Eccleston and Mignon Dupree and so many different players. And I was like, and then you sort of start watching the 100 or the CPL or the Big Bash, and that person and that person and that person, and I just get quite excited.
And I think that's the thing that I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier. Like, having that tournament over here was really exciting for us because we could get to go and see them live, and it wouldn't necessarily be having to get up at, the 2017 World Cup, for example, was on at 2 a.m. over here, so you don't get that exposure to it as much. But the more tournaments that they start having, which was a conversation we had earlier about should they have more tournaments, the more tournaments you start having, the more households these names become, the more you want to follow them, the more you want to watch them. So I think it all links into just there should be more available women's cricket.
Yes, there should be. Unfortunately, the White Ferns only getting the one series this summer here against Bangladesh, which is currently being played. Another T20 coming up, and then into the ODI squad next week.
Yep.
Which we'll see then. But I promised Mark that we could talk about England, West Indies, and Nat Siver.
Woo! Now we're talking. This is my kettle of fish. So the 2023 World Cup champions, T20 World Cup champions, are playing the West Indies women at the moment, and they are doing an absolutely fantastic job. England batted first, and Nat Siver, as you say, 90 off 96, batted quite a way through the innings. She's really good at being the anchor, I feel. If we lose an early wicket, it's either her, I think, or Heather Knight are generally the anchors that you play around in a 50-over game.
Great to see Heather Knight back too.
It is, yeah. She was out injured for the last series. Yeah, it was quite a while. It
was basically just after the World Cup. I think she went into major surgery. Great to have her back.
For sure. England got 307 for 7 there. So yeah, Nat Sivert a mainstay with 90, and Danny Wyatt 68 off 60, down at number 6, I think she was. She had been opening during the World Cup, but she's now moved down to number 6 and seems to relish in it. And then West Indies, they lost. Shame. 165 all out. And nobody there really making any runs for the West Indies. Casey and Knight with the top score of 39, and for the bowlers for England, well, Charlie Dean. Do you know what? I love Charlie Dean. I think she's fantastic. She's such a good cricketer, and after the whole sort of mankad thing that went on over the summer back in the UK, her personality really came through. She was like, yeah, don't care, I'm just going to crack on, take some wickets, just loving life. She seems like somebody who really loves the game. And she is really good at it as well.
Did you see what she did in the final the day after at Lord's?
No.
Oh yeah, didn't she pretend to do it, and then she just started laughing.
Oh, good on her.
Yeah.
Just brushed it off straight away, and that's kind of what you want to see, like not taking it too seriously. I guess as a young player she'll learn from that, but also just have a bit of a laugh. That's what it's all about when you play professional sport, I reckon.
Yes.
Getting paid a good amount.
That's true. All right, so England will take on the West Indies again. They've got 2 more T20s and then a one-off. 2 more ODIs and then a one-off T20. Are you going to win them all?
Yeah. What a stupid question. Yes, we will win them all. I guess the only concerning thing is if somebody like Deandra Dotton does have a good innings. But I also think that England probably need that throughout this series in preparation for the tournament that's coming up in South Africa, is test themselves under pressure, find who their go-tos are in pressure situations, and I guess that's what this series is about. Much like the same, you'd kind of hope that Bangladesh put New Zealand or the White Ferns under a bit of pressure over the coming series that they've got, just because you want to know who you can throw the ball to in the death overs when they've they only need 6 and over or whatever. That would be my point. Hopefully it's a bit of a closer game next game.
Nah, I hope Susie Bates gets a 50 or 100.
50, I was going to say, keeping it light there, aren't you?
No, she's going to get 100.
She's going to get 100.
Susie Bates.
I have a question about this, right? I got asked this question last week. What do you think about New Zealand choosing to go with younger players for their contracts?
Yeah.
I feel really strongly on this one. I think I dedicated so much of my time at the start of this year just going on about it. I think there's no real issue with it, because at the end of the day, when we're seeing Eden Carson get freefers and actually do really well, you can't really say that was a bad choice, because she's doing well, she's taking wickets, she's winning games. At the same time, you kind of feel for people like Kate Ibrahim, who she's been the highest run scorer in the HBJ for the past 2 years now, and is currently the highest run scorer. So you got to feel for people like her who genuinely worked quite hard to try and earn her spot back, because that's what you do when you lose it. But she's not being rewarded it back, because they're thinking of the younger players, which isn't. It's not a horrific approach. I do appreciate what they're trying to do there, but you want your best players, and at the end of the day, I think Kate Ibrahim is one of them. She's not that old either. I think she's only 30, so it's a bit mad that they won't pick her, either because she's a bit older than some of the young ones they're picking, or just because they're a bit blind.
Yeah, so I have a question for that. Which kind of is what I think New Zealand cricket are trying to do with the White Ferns team, is are they looking in 4 years' time at the next World Cup? So they're now giving the younger players 4 years, and they're saying, right, we're going to give you a central contract, we're going to back you, we want you in our team in 4 years' time. Now we're going to give you the experience so that when 4 years' time comes around, we want you to be able to perform in that World Cup. Whereas if you keep, Susie Bates is great to have around, Sophie Devine is great to have around, Amy Satterthwaite, again, great experience. but it's now for me a really good time to go, right, okay, we've just had a World Cup where we thought we might do a little bit better than what we would. You guys aren't going to be around in 4 years' time, so now's the time for us to reset, look to the future, give you girls 4 years to really make a stamp on international cricket and just blend yourself into that environment.
Yeah, could be, and I think you have to sort of look at it a bit underneath the international. We've had this development tour, which is the first in New Zealand cricket, or for at least the women anyway. They've never torn away with the development side. So there you're sort of seeing, there are some under-19 players, there are some very young players, so the fact that we've had this tour again suggests that, you know, we want players to come up, and we may see some of these in the side in the next few games for, you know, the next 4 years. There's quite a lot of prep for it. I don't know if it is for the next World Cup or if it's just a massive change in development. Because either way, it's a good thing. There's not really been a lot of New Zealand cricket to this extent, I suppose, in past years. So whether it is for the World Cup or whether it is because there's a change in attitudes and people do just genuinely want the best for the women's game, it's just good to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they did come out and say that you have to look to the future at this point. And I think the other thing just to consider is that if you don't play women professionally now, that I feel like women have to go and say, is cricket going to be my career, or do I have to go to university and get a well-paying job?
Yeah.
And that's a choice a lot of them sort of have to make in the next year or two. So I think they need to be backed now.
Or do you get into a situation where, you know, you've got Ellie and Kelly, for example, who's moved over to Ireland and is now playing international cricket for Ireland. She could be doing a job for the White Ferns. Do you lose more players who have different heritages that could then go on and play elsewhere overseas and make a career overseas and lose your best pool of talent? You know, there's so many different things to think about, but I think it's a good thing from what you're saying, Ellie, getting them into a development setup. You've got an under-19s tour. It gives the girls the confidence to go, do you know what, I could make this. I could make a career out of international cricket, and it gives them the confidence to work on it and go out and produce, which hopefully the White Ferns will be able to do for many years to come, apart from when they play England.
Okay, before we wrap up, I've got a very important question for you, because you are from England.
Yeah, I have a question as well, but you go first.
Okay. Who is your Super Smash team?
Auckland.
Thank God for that.
We nearly had to delete the whole episode.
I was going to say, glad we haven't wasted the last 35 minutes. Woo! God, if you'd have said Canterbury.
Oh, if you'd said Central. Oh.
Or just anyone, Northern or Otago or anyone else that we've forgotten about.
Wellington.
Oh, Wellington, that was the one I forgot
You can't
about
say
earlier.
you can't say Wellington though, because then you're just on the, you know, like Sofa Devine, Kerr, sisters, Maddie Green,
Yeah.
Maddie Green train, and that's just the best players. So
Yeah.
you're just bandwagoning.
Yeah, I agree. My question for you, last question is, it doesn't even have to be international cricketer. I was going to say any international cricketer, any cricketer that you could just either have a net with or just have a day with, like go out for dinner,
Have a beer.
go for a walk in the park, go and get hammered in town. Like, who would it be and why?
Laura Harris seems to be a really good vibe. Like,
Yeah.
you've seen her like the not Super Smash, BBL Play Mike, and you're just like, she is a bundle of energy. I love her.
Awesome. And would you do a net or would you go out and just enjoy a bloody good day?
Go out. My body is not made for like any nuts.
Same as me.
Oh, you should have seen when I tried to hold a cricket bat earlier. We will put a photo of that on the socials later, just so everyone can see what I have to deal with.
Who would you pick?
Who would I pick? The natural answer would be Sophie Eccleston, but I'm not going to go for the natural answer. I'm going to go for Shabnam Ismail. Because I reckon she's an absolute firecracker,
Yeah,
and I
she
reckon
is
she'd
great,
be
yeah.
such good crack.
Yeah, it should be a good crack.
Yeah, that's who I go. Who would you go for?
I think I would go for. I reckon I'd go for Frankie Mackay.
Oh yeah.
I think she'd be a real good fun day out. Like, you hear her commentating and she knows so much, but she's so funny.
Yeah. So my number
Yeah.
2 was Katie Martin.
Yeah, Katie
Because
Martin's a
I
crack
do
up.
think she's crack up as well.
Ellie, thank you so much for joining us at very early England time.
Yes. Thank you.
Where can people find you if they want to hear more from you?
I do a fair bit of writing on the domestic season in New Zealand, so if you want to catch that, I think it's just ellie.medium. If you want to find me on Twitter, it's at 548, and like you mentioned at the start, I have my own podcast, Women's Cricket Ramblings, on Spotify.
Awesome.
I said before I had a question, which is my last question. I actually have a last question now. 5 for 8. Can you explain?
So, I used to wake up a fair bit for the India series, which was, I'm thinking like a good 2 years ago now, maybe. And I was losing hope. It was a really bad one because it was England-India, men's series. I was really losing hope. And then Joe Root decides one day that he is England's best ever spinner. He is going to take 5 wickets for 8 runs, and that he's just the greatest ever. So I'm like, you know what, that's quite cool, Joe, but I'm not going to name myself after you right now. Then it comes to the WBBL, and Amanda Jade Wellington takes 5 for 8, and I'm a massive Amanda Jade Wellington fan. I honestly lead the Justice for Amanda Jade Wellington party, so I'm like, okay, Amanda, I'll rename it after you. And ever since then, she's taken 5 for 8 again in the WBBL. Shabba Miss Mills taken 5 for 8, I think, in international. I found out that Auckland ace, is it Sean Salia? He's taken 5 for 8 in first class. So, you know, you just find all these 5 for 8s, and it's just really cool.
Great.
I love seeing your post when you found out that somebody has actually taken 5 for 8. It's one of the things I look
I
out
get
for on
tagged
Twitter. It's
so
amazing.
much. Yeah, like if anyone takes a 5 for 8, I'm like, Ellie, look at this, at 5 for 8, at 5 for 8. And I'm like, you know what, I love it.
Yeah. You've got to own it, and you definitely do. It's been amazing to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us on what is a special episode for us as well. We look forward to getting you back on in the future and just speaking to you in between, obviously, all over the socials, as we always are.
Right, let's finish off the episode with our usual segment, the first 11 of the week.
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 Of the week. Is that our new jingle?
No.
No? Cool. Yeah, don't blame you. There was a bit of an awkward silence there when neither of us knew what to do. That kind of just took off from nowhere. I feel like this week you might have a very special...
Every first 11 is very special.
Yeah, I was trying to find the right words to say it. A very topical 11 of the week, given that this is celebrating the Wahine in cricket. What do you have for us this week?
Well, we have talked about women cricketers from around the world, highlighting the fact there are, 11 very good teams out there. So,
Yep.
I've compiled a first 11 with one player from each nation.
This will be interesting.
So we're going to start opening the batting with one of my favourite players, Susie Bates from New Zealand.
Yep, not a surprise she's number 1.
She is number 1 both in terms of opening the batting and just number 1.
Yeah, fair.
Number 1. All right. In at 2 from Australia, Alyssa Healy. In at 3 from India, Smriti Mandana. In at 4 from the West Indies, Hayley Matthews. Side note, I'm still buzzing over her World Cup performance from months ago. Remember that one massive innings she had? Anyway,
After she'd pulled a hamstring as well.
She did. From Pakistan, we have Bisma Maroof. And next from Sri Lanka, Chamari Tapatu. South Africa, one of my favourites, Marizan Cap.
Yeah. Blessed be to God.
From England, I've gone with Kate Cross because we've seen so many other wonderful English players today. I'm gonna shout out Kate Cross because I think she's really, really good.
Yeah.
Bangladesh, she's here on our shores. Jahanara Alam, she is fierce.
She is an absolute vibe. Ellie mentioned that word a lot, like vibes and stuff, and she generally is. She is immaculate, but a fierce competitor. I love her. I think she's great.
From Ireland, I've got to go with the wonderful Arlene Kelly, Auckland lady. Love that she's playing over there now. And rounding it out, we've gone from someone from the Netherlands, just to throw in a bit of spice. It is Esther de Lange.
Nice.
Look out for all those names. Hopefully at the upcoming World Cup, we will talk a lot more about the Women's World Cup when that kicks off in South Africa in February.
You may also note that is the first 11 to actually be a specific 11 in terms of how they would present themselves on a scorecard. because you had your 6 batters there, 5 bowlers.
And a
which is the
wicket-keeper.
First time ever. And a wicket-keeper as well. Jesus, that is an
Right.
actual team.
Women doing it for themselves.
Absolutely. That is a wrap. Thank you again to Ellie for coming on. Please do go and follow her page, follow her podcast, have a listen. She is fantastic. She is awesome. We'll be back here next week.
Yeah, we will be. By that time, we would have seen some more of the women playing the White Ferns Bangladesh series, so we'll be following that over on our socials as well, at Back of a Length, the little underscore on Twitter, at Back of a Length on Instagram, and we're floating around Facebook as well.
Cool. See ya.
So yeah.